Or change it.
Or change it. Which is okay by me if we can have that conversation. I'm actually wanting to break these things open. Because you could just we would just have like a catch-all that says, regional studies as needed, and then you would be consistent with the long-range plan, and that's good as far as the feds are concerned. However, my understanding is certain liberties were taken in past efforts, so therefore they've got a board policy or something that says things have to be very specific. So we'll have to, I would like to revisit that, but for now, you're better off just saying, yes, you want to do a Manitou Springs needs study, get that in, and then that way you're eligible for future funds without having to go back and amend the long-range plan to do it. So a study for a study is okay.
And then one more question. So this is the third meeting I've been to, and this is the third or fourth cat I work in the city of Manitou Springs. So if the city, this process occurs every 4 years, correct? And if you miss getting an application in by this deadline, is there, and we identify something that we feel might be eligible for TIP funding maybe a year from now, is that when the long-range plan amendment process comes into play, or is it just off the table for 4 years?
Yeah, so you're right. We do have a policy that to be eligible for the TIP, the project needs to be in the fiscally constrained list of the long-range plan. That is a process that occurs every 4 years. So in order to get a new project onto that list, we would have to make an amendment to the plan. So it's possible. Of course, it's not something we want to do every month, like, hey, we got a new project, but it is possible. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't want you to think it's going to be here comes now to another amendment.
Well, not again.
Well, maybe you should clarify too what happens if you do an amendment, because you have to adjust projects and
the list does have to remain fiscally constrained, so there does have to be, there's a red line, and there's only so much room above it. So if we get something else above the line, something else drops below the line, or we have to find money in the sky or in the bushes, or whatever.
So that wouldn't really be fair to the other members if we were to try to amend a plan that wasn't in one of their projects or one of our. It would be more like a management project would have to be identified that the funding would go. Is that right, Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, if you had a project that's been in the plan for some time and you haven't moved it forward anywhere and you wanted to withdraw it, as long as the money, an equal amount of money coming out would go back in with your new project. You could substitute one out.
That's much more likely. That's much more likely than booting someone else's project, or if you have a very large project and you find that there are some cost savings, and so that frees up.
Just make sure you realize regional funds are just that. The regional funds, they are not, what's the word?
Yours.
So when something is in the plan, that's because the region has said, we like this project, we're going to back this project. If you remove that project, it's not your money to move to another project. You resubmit it into the process. So while from a practical that being said, unless you come prepared to remove one of your own projects, it's unlikely the rest of the folks will vote to remove the Colorado Springs project, whatever. But that is possible. That's the way the process is written. That if you run a project and everyone says, boy, that's great, what project can we remove? And you have another great project, and they still want to remove that. They can say, all right, well, everyone in favor of removing the funds from jurisdiction X. Knows how I need naming names. Just put that in there and you do that. But just to be clear, even though that's what they're telling you is a practical thing, the federal rules are done in such a way that is.
So best choice is to just stay up all weekend and get that application written and have it in by 8 o'clock on Monday morning.
I'm not whining. I talked to Victoria last time I saw her 2 weeks ago, and I'm not going to whine about 1 or 2 applications when she's working on something like 35.
No, just 27 by myself. No biggie.
And it's not like they're asking you to do anything else, right?
Right. It's not like I have another job.
So, Brian, we have not actually called the meeting to order yet. This is
Yes.
like extra time.
Sure.
Can I ask one more question related?
So kind of like the World Cup, add 5 minutes to the, yeah.
Okay, I heard the no to the 12, and there's a chance that we'll be working on them over the weekend also. If we're here like 8:30, 9 o'clock, is that still going to be? You're not going to.
I don't know.
Well, look, so the easy answer is whenever someone says that, then it sort of says, all right, well, someone says 8, and we say, and then they say, well, how about 8:30? We say, okay, 8:30. Then the second we do that, then someone says, well, how about 9? So then before you know it, it's like, well, how about the next day? So let me just say this. Officially, we are saying the deadline is at 8 o'clock. And if something comes in after 8 o'clock, and during the process, another member of the committee says, yeah, but did this project even follow the rules? Were they in on time? We're going to have to answer honestly, and then you guys will have to decide if that project gets tossed out or not. So
then it might as
Peer
well be-
pressure.
It might as well be 5 p.m. on Friday.
right. So all in favor of pushing the deadline back or forward to Friday, that's fine. But it doesn't matter to us. It's just if that way people wanted the weekend, we would have said 8 in the morning on that Monday. That being said, how well do you know us if a thing says 8:05?
Well, you we don't know so well, but the last one we knew we were done at that point. So we are happy that you are.
Like I said,
We're glad you're here, John.
there's a reason for the rules, and we're just trying to be fair to everybody. That being said, we're not going to strangle the process with the rules so we don't get anything done. So let's just say it's just do 8 o'clock. As far as we're concerned, that's the official deadline. We're not going to say anything else. And then if it comes in a little after, but again, you take the risk if we're doing the process and it's between two projects and someone goes, so did they get theirs in on time? Is that really an official thing? We're going to answer that question truthfully. So it's in your best interest. Just get it done the Friday beforehand.
And I don't know if it said this, I hope it said somewhere in the materials who to send it to, but I am going to be doing the collection for the first review of the project, so please email it to me if you want to copy John or someone else just for email security. That's totally fine, but please make sure I want the email.
If we email them in? I'm sorry, I missed the first part, what you said.
Oh, yes, I assumed, or do they have to be delivered in person?
Ours are going to be so large that you can't.
Oh, okay. Well, then drop them off at the front desk or bring them back to my desk. But if you are emailing something related to golfer projects, please include me on it.
You might get 27 emails from me, but
Okay.
That's the problem is they're like, if we're delivering in a big pack, I can't send you one big email.
Okay. Then just bring it in.
Yeah.
So be here at 7:59.
I guess. There'll be a line at the door. When they open it.
we'll all be standing here.
The applications, I'll deliver them to 8 o'clock on the
How many do you have?
So we're doing like 3, yeah.
Other questions? And next week, as you're working on them, feel free to email me or call. I'll be around, so happy to help.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. All right. Okay, welcome, everybody. We'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum, and let's start with introductions.
Victoria.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Tim Roberts, City of Colorado Springs.
Larry Manning, Town of Monument.
Randy Williams, City of Fountain.
John Leo Santos, PPACG.
Paul Saunier, City Council, Woodland Park.
Sally Riley, Planning Director, City of Woodland Park.
Chris Hall, Woodland Park Planning Intern.
Wendy Pettit, Seedot Region 2.
Shelley Cobos, City of Manitou Springs Public Services Director.
Eric Jenkins, City of Manitou Springs.
Darren Horsmeyer, River Air Force Base.
Deborah Baumgartner, USAFA.
Jason Dosh, Town of Palmer Lake.
Come on.
Sorry, I apologize.
Her daughter, Melissa Baumgartner.
Hi, Melissa.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Jason Dosh, Town of Palmer Lake.
Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit. And in the audience, please.
Betsy Jacobson, Seedot Bike and
Martello, City Department of Finance.
Ken Bregler, PPACG.
Brian Jensen, Woodland Park Main Street.
And staff? Teresa? All right, great. Welcome, everybody. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda, or are there any changes requested? If not, could I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
And a second?
Second.
So it's a motion from Tim and a second from Victoria. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Anybody from the audience like to comment? Okay, thank you. Item 4, approval of last month's June 21st TAC meeting minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review? Any comments or revisions? Would someone like to make a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So, motion from Victoria, second from Tim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Item 5, Board of Directors report from last month's board meeting. John?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we had, I believe, 4 items of interest to this committee that were on the Board of Directors agenda. Item 5, the action items contained approval of the Unified Work Program, Amendment Number 2. And we've sent that on to Lily, so we think that's in process. Item B, the small area forecast was approved. So now we've got that data set as a snapshot in time. As we were saying, going through that small area forecast process, while that's been adopted and ready to go, if you have new land use or comprehensive or any other sort of land use changes within your jurisdiction, please still continue to get us that information, and we'll start updating the model for the next time somebody needs it. So if a jurisdiction makes a request to use the small area forecast data set, it's up to date. And so we would like to remind everybody that we'll still take information moving forward for the next one, but the small area forecast for this long-range plan process is closed and adopted, and so we're ready to move forward in the long-range process. We also had the transit development plan approved, and again, that's the Seedot effort that they want to have development plans for roadway, transit, and as we'll hear in a little bit, bike and ped. So this was the transit plan. They approved that. There was an additional discussion about the ballot measure itself and the fact that that ballot measure is multimodal, and so therefore there was questions about what process we use to fix these projects move forward. We did make sure that it was understood that it was it's our development plan so that we can update it. I believe Commissioner Vanderwerf wanted to make sure that it was understood that it's our working document. So after the long-range plan submittals, it might be appropriate for us to go back and maybe revisit it. I think, Brian, you've mentioned there's maybe a couple of things on that list that maybe aren't as much of a priority as on the last day of the process as they were on the first day of the process. So again, it's our list and we were able to move forward, but again, the board approved that list and it was forwarded on to CDOT and included in their materials that they put together for the Transportation Commission. And then the board also heard a information item from CDOT. I believe Mark Andrews gave them an update on the priority projects for the region. That is also going to be part of the ballot initiative, provided it gets all of its 98,000 signatures. So, Mr. Chair, those are the items that were presented to the board at their meeting of July 11th.
All right, thank you, John. Any questions or comments about that? All right, thank you. Item 6, our only action item, the PPACG TIP flexible funding policy. We did hear an information item on this last month, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Ken Prather, PPACG. Yeah, last month I introduced this topic, Federal Highways Administration, in reviewing our cost overrun, our flexible TIP flexible fund policy identified the way that it was worded. It implied that a entity could unilaterally cancel a project and transfer those funds to a different project. And they wanted to clarify that that cannot happen if a project is canceled. If any funds become available, they must come back to the regional pool and go through then an open competitive process to be reassigned. It's the way we've always done it in the past, but they wanted the clarification in writing. So at the bottom of the page of your memo, you can see where there's a strikeout, where we remove and use these funds for cost overruns on a different one of their own funded projects. By eliminating that and then adding the sentence, any entity needing funds for cost overruns may then request the use of these funds. That would meet the federal desire. I mean, you could do other wording as well, but that wording does meet and clarify what they were requesting.
So this is similar to what John was saying about taking a project out of the plan, the money
Right.
goes back into the pool. It's not your money to assign to another project.
Out of the plan or out of the TIP, it's the same thing.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that's right. That's sort of that concept. We had chatted with Aaron briefly and said, hey, reviewing the policies and procedures as written, and given the discussion that this committee had during the information item last time, we mentioned that it might be advantageous for us to do this change as part of a comprehensive redo or overhaul of the policies and make them a little easier to read, make them a little clearer. And he said, that's great, you guys should do that, but we want to make sure that we move forward because if anything were to happen, we want to make sure this change takes. So this is just sort of the minimum change that needs to happen at this time to address the FHWA concerns. But we would say that we did hear what you all said about the backup list, not backup list.
The waiting list.
Waiting list and things like that. And those will come back to you in the form of a policy amendment or a rewrite of the policies in the future. Probably not next month because, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but in the next couple of months, we'll bring that back to you. We are in the process of hiring a new TIP person to replace Kevin, so we'll probably have that in, like I said, the next couple of months. And then that's when we'll address all of those other things that were part of that discussion. So now this is just sort of the bare minimum to satisfy FHW's request to make sure there's clarification.
Thank you. So the rephrasing of that sentence that's on the bottom of the first page of the memo, is that what is going to be on the fourth bullet of the policy?
Yes.
Right? So
That would replace the fourth bullet.
Okay. Okay. Are there any questions or comments on this? Victoria.
Okay, clarification. In the asterisk paragraph, because we have on here that if a canceled project can't go on a waiting list, and based on what we talked about at the last meeting, I'm thinking if we just cut that sentence and then potentially change those funds will be allocated to projects based on their original score, we should probably say may, because a project may have the top score, but it may not be ready to go yet, and they may want to wait. So if we change that to that may or that will to a may and cut that sentence, I think we could go forward.
So which sentence are you going to cut?
If a project is canceled, it cannot go on to the waiting list. because sort of what we talked about last month was allowing it to go onto the waiting list. So we can accomplish a lot, I think, if we cut that one sentence and change the will to a may. And I think it then holds the original intent that we tried to put together when we met for many months discussing this policy, I don't know, 2 years ago, a year ago. Time flies.
Well, that's what John was referring to, is that we prefer not to open this up now, changing the waiting list procedures. We don't have a current waiting list, and the board is in the middle of developing a strategic plan. We've got a new executive director, a new transportation director. Hopefully very soon we'll have a new TIP manager. We'd like to get all of those on board and see what is the direction that we're going, and then do a complete review and overhaul of all of the TIP policies as we start the development of the next TIP, rather than piecemealing things one item at a time. So we would not have addressed, we tried to get FHWA to allow us not to have to address just this one issue at this time. Let us roll it all into one overall review and revision, but they said, no, you need to take care of the pool issue immediately.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so I don't want to contradict you, Ken, if I'm missing something, and then afterwards you pull me aside, kind of, give me a shot in the ribs and say, you missed the point. So forgive us if we just have this little quick conversation. But if it doesn't matter, because we are going to redo the TIP policies and procedures, and because we are, the fact that it doesn't matter if we make the change, it is equally true as if it doesn't matter if we do make the change. So if the committee is comfortable removing that line now as part of this action item, I'm thinking that we could go ahead and do it, because that, again, still makes Aaron happy, because it's clarified the language, it's got their intent in there. And then when we come back with the rest of the things, it's already in there. Or if I find that as we're doing it, it doesn't work, then we'll fix it when we fix the rest of it. So, and like I said, feel free, again, tell me I'm wrong, and if it does matter, then let's let them know it matters. But if it doesn't, then...
Boss, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong.
No, you can't.
Caution.
It's just sometimes I think we get sort of the whole thing is like, oh, well, we don't need to do that. But at the same time, if that's true, then it doesn't matter if we do that. So if that's the will of the committee, I'd much rather err on giving them what they want as the committee and then fixing it later than telling them they can't do stuff.
Yeah, it is the prerogative of the motion maker and the committee to make the motion and vote on it.
Yeah, and I don't think, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I think this motion does not violate anything. All you're saying is that you're striking a sentence that it would go on the list, so that's, since the list doesn't exist, it's okay to say it's not going on a list that doesn't exist, and then it's still keeping the intent of any money that is removed from a project goes back into the pot. Everyone gets to know that the money's available before it gets reprogrammed. So I think the intent is the same, so I think we can do that, but again, like Ken said, it's what you want to do. So I think if that's the will of the committee, we can move forward with that.
All right, thank you.
How about I was going to say, how about I just make it easy and make a motion, and then you can discuss?
Sure.
Okay, so I will move for the adoption of the PPACG TIP flexible funding policy with 2 edits. One, to change in the second to last sentence, will to a may. I'm sorry, third to last sentence. And to cut the second to last sentence.
This will or this will? Because this is the fourth to the last sentence.
Oh, is it? Okay. I apparently cannot count periods. Let me try again. I will move that we approve the PPACG TIP flexible funding policy by changing the word will to may in the fourth to last sentence and striking the second to last sentence. Thank you for the correction.
For clarification, could somebody maybe read for the committee how it would read, or at least the last part of it?
Sure. If a project sponsor cancels or changes the scope of a project, any remaining funds will go back into the regional pool of funds. If there are remaining funds, those funds will be applied to other projects in the TIP that are also experiencing cost overruns. Those funds may be allocated to projects based on their original score. This funding pool will be applied to project cost overruns on a quarterly basis. The canceled project is eligible for submission during the next call for projects.
Great. So we have a motion. Can we have a second?
So are you changing the bullet at all, the proposed language that was on the front page?
I understood from what you said that
He's
that,
telling me a different.
that bullet's being replaced by this.
No, that
By this.
is that your proposal?
This-
that's not how it's written. It's not written with the new language, that's the old language.
Oh.
Say that we're adopting the new language.
Okay.
It's unclear whether beyond the four bullets, how much of that is part of the policy and how much of that is an explanation of the policy. But this was the way it was presented to the board, so I didn't change it. If you want to consider it that it was part of the policy, then you could change the fourth bullet and then change what you said down here, and then they would be consistent between the bullet and the paragraph.
Okay, so same motion with the adoption of the change on the last paragraph of the memo page. Now that I've completely confused myself, anybody dare to second?
No, not yet, but I have a question. So, do we or do we not have a waiting list of projects?
Okay, the answer is sort of, because technically the projects that didn't make it into the TIP when it was scored, they're still scored and we know where they fall.
Okay.
Is it a list that we publish that we say, here's the waiting list? No. But if we needed to produce what those projects were, that would be possible.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So that paragraph that starts PPACG has a waiting list of projects is true. It's not untrue.
I would say it's true.
It's a theoretical truth. We have a waiting list and there are no projects on it. We allow the possibility of a waiting list, but there are currently no projects on it.
So why are the projects that scored just below not on our waiting list?
Because in the last TIP, beginning of this year, the 2019 TIP, you submitted 10 projects for CMAQ, TAP, and Metro funds. 6 projects were withdrawn. They weren't scored and failed to make the list. They were withdrawn.
I understand now.
4 were recommended.
So we have one, it just doesn't have any projects on it.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. I get it now. Thank you.
John.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, I'm trying to, be respectful of things that have happened before I got here, and I'm fine with that. But I think one of the things that need to be cleaned up is from a, I don't want to use the word legal, but from a very cut and dry sort of perspective, there is in fact no list unless that list is adopted by the board of directors, unless that list is publicly available and generated through a transparent process. So while there might be a theoretical list or whatever, again, I think that could be the understanding. However, unless we've actually gone through a process to approve something like that and we've actually have it documented somewhere where the public can see it, it's not really something there. But that being said, now that I understand what your intent is, as we revise the policies and procedures, we might not call it a backup list or reserve list. We might probably call it an illustrative list of projects that would be funded should funding become available. We can even put that into the TIP document itself. But again, I'm a little leery saying that a thing exists when in fact it doesn't really. So forgive me for that, but I just have to sort of be on the record.
All right, thank you. Randy.
So, this thing that doesn't actually exist but kind of exists, do we want it in this flexible funding policy? Or do we want to get Victoria's motion done and over with and on the books, and then we'll fix this when you create this illustrative list?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in a perfect world, we would have just sort of waited. Aaron wanted us to move forward, so then that's why we took the approach, just do the minimum and we'll fix it down the line. That being said, when I heard Victoria's motion, I thought it sort of helped fix, because you actually removed the sentence that talked about something that doesn't really exist. So
A sentence, not all of them.
Yeah, there is still another one,
I think at this point, it's up to the committee. I'm not trying to punt, but I also don't want to be overly, if you're comfortable taking the time to clean it up now, you can clean it up now. If it's this point, look, we all know what it is. We're not going to have a change of folks. Let's do the bare minimum, and then everybody sort of understands what it is, and then come back in 2 months and then have it in writing, so that way, as people get reassigned to this committee, if they change jobs, they change whatever, we need a living, breathing document that documents our process, that makes sure that we're always doing things consistently, regardless of who shows up at this meeting or who's been assigned to the TIP process from the individual jurisdictions. So the short term, I think we're okay doing the bare minimum. Long term, boy howdy, I think we need to fix this, and it's on my list of things that keep me up at night going, boy, I got to get that done relatively quickly.
Okay.
Okay, well, on that note, I'll second her motion.
Great, thank you.
And I have it now in writing, and I'll provide it to staff. As soon as Brian proofreads it for me.
You want to use my red pen?
Yes, please.
All right, so we have a motion from Victoria and a second from Brandy. Any other comments or discussion? All right, all in favor?
Quick clarification. So we're taking Victoria's, what she read, replacing it with on the last part.
No, we're leaving what I read.
Right.
And we're tweaking bullet number 4 by removing and use those funds for cost overruns on a different one of their own funded projects. So it's a change to bullet 4, a change to the fourth one up, and a change.
And not this one.
No, it is this. That is
Well-
basically this bullet.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
Victoria?
Yes, sir.
On the top of the next page, there is a second sentence in that. Do you want to include that or not?
Okay, wait, let me get my packet back in order here.
As she does by default, the paragraph goes on the next page.
Yes.
Okay.
So that you understand what I'm,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Does everybody understand sort of now? Because I can pass that around if that helps.
All right, good. We have a motion and a second.
Oh, okay.
Last call. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you for your indulgence on my inept motion.
Did you want
Take
this
it.
back?
No, you take
Okay.
it.
Thank you.
Good comments, everybody. Thanks, Ken.
You're welcome.
All right, item 7A, Seedot Statewide Bicycle Plan. Betsy,
And I'm
welcome.
going to introduce Betsy Jacobson from Seedot, who is down here to introduce us to the statewide bicycle plan.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. Before I start, I'm taking a poll. How many of you are familiar that Seedot has a bike and pedestrian section? Not too bad, not too bad. Usually it's about 50-50. I think you guys go a little bit more than that. So we do have we are a multimodal agency. The bike and pedestrian section works on the 5 E's: engineering, evaluation, education, enforcement, and what's the 5th one? Evaluation.
Oh, you said engineering evaluation.
Let's go education, encouragement, evaluation, enforcement, and engineering. You'd think with 5 I would have those emblazoned in my head. We work in all categories of those topics. So we provide technical support for engineering, we provide technical support for planning, as well as doing plans ourselves. We do outreach, we do education, we work with law enforcement on all kinds of things, from events to trying to get different laws in place and enforced. So it's the whole gamut. And what I'm here today to talk to you about are a couple of things that we're working on this year. And so I'll start with an inventory of bicycle facilities. In the last year, we've been working to develop an inventory of everything on the state highway system and anything adjacent to it that could be considered a bicycle facility. So that could be a shoulder that is 4 feet or wider. It could be a multi-purpose path. It could be a recreational roadway next to it. There are various things that you could consider a bicycle facility, and we are developing that inventory so that we can understand more where we are right now and where we want to go in the future. So that will be completed probably late this summer, and from that then we're working on the next step, which is identifying high-priority bicycle corridors. So when you look at an inventory, we're looking at it and grading it on the level of compatibility for bicyclists, also known as a level of stress. It's similar to a level of service, but for bicyclists, we found that if you measure their level of stress, how anxious do they get when they're riding on a certain facility, we find out that, if you have even a stripe on a roadway, even if the shoulder is only a foot, their level of stress decreases than if you have no line at all. So we're assigning that level of stress. There are formulas for it. So every facility that we inventory, we are then looking at and identifying what that level of stress is. And from that, we are then going to look at high-priority corridors. What are the corridors that we want to look at that are the best for bicycling in our state? It's not just Seedot sitting in a dark room deciding this. We're going to be talking with different people, and we've already got consultants helping us, talking to folks about where do you think is the best place for bicyclists to ride? What are the gaps within a corridor? What should we be looking at? Scenic byways come high on a list. We've got lots of bicyclists that like to ride on byways, but in some cases the byways really need some work and care. So we're looking at all these different aspects and then identifying those corridors. Okay, so that's step 2. Step 3 is our bicycle statewide plan. How many are familiar that we do have an existing plan? Oh, very low turnout, very low. So we have a bicycle and pedestrian plan. It's been in place for about 5 years, but it's very policy-based. It was the first plan we ever made. It needed to be policy-based, but now it's time to take that a step higher. And we are going to split the modes, so we're going to have one plan for bicycling and one plan for pedestrians, because they really are 2 different modes. And a lot of times we group them together, but your legs are a different vehicle than something you pedal. So we're splitting those apart. We're going to start on the bike plan this year. We're going to work on the pedestrian plan next year. So where you come in is that we are going to be gathering your input to look at projects, and we want to include them in the plan. So as you are thinking, developing, creating projects, not just for what you're going to fund, but things that you have in your plan, things that you want to accomplish, we want them all, because we want to start looking at where are we going as a state, and that we want to have, again, an inventory of projects so we can truly identify what does it take for us to be a truly bicycle-friendly state. So we're going to start working on that sometime this fall. We're in the process of getting our procurement and contractor and all that kind of stuff in place, and that can take a while. But we do want to be coming back to you and talking to you about how do we gather this information. We don't want it to be, some mind-bending, horrible experience. We want it to be easy and simple, and we want it so that we can also adjust it as time goes on. So even though it goes into the plan, it doesn't become just this list that nothing happens with, but gets reviewed. You can look at things and see what gets done, what doesn't get done, what gets funded, so on and so on. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's, yeah, John.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so the plan itself, is that for just the state facilities?
No, we're going to include everything.
Okay.
We want, and when you look at states, everybody does things. Some do it similarly, some are different, but I think a state plan should include everything, because we don't just stop the state where the state roadways end. And We touch a lot of facilities that may not be a state facility, but we touch them. They're entrances to our facilities. So I think it's important to have everything included in there.
So, to make sure we use little words so that I understand, we're basically talking about a third development program. So we've got the development for the roadways, we've got the transit development plan that we just finished, and then we're going to update soon. So now we're really talking about a bicycle pedestrian, or just bicycle, and then, when you said you're going to split them up, is there going to be a fourth one? Is there going to be a bicycle plan and then a pedestrian development plan?
The pedestrian piece, I'm not sure yet we're going to do.
Okay.
Because so much of the pedestrian activity is done on local streets, other than, state highways that run through town, typically. But I think that's another animal that we really have to look at.
But it wouldn't preclude it, so, for
Right.
example, if there is a multi-use path that is
Yes.
bicycle but also does
Yes.
pedestrians, we could put that on that list.
Yep.
Okay, so that would be that third sort of development plan that we want to sort of kick off here in the near future.
Yep.
All right.
And I think, part of it too, your existing development plan, we're going to be looking at as well, because as I mentioned, there are aspects of just regular roadways that are perfectly fine for bicyclists to ride on, and that you don't have to say, well, this shoulder work is going to be in the bike plan. It might already be a bike facility, but it's in your development plan for a roadway improvement. See what I mean? So we're going to be looking at that as well, and lining that up with our inventory list. And it's going to be a little tricky, I got to admit. This is something we've not done before, but I think it's time and I think it's important. Yes?
So along those lines that you're not going to stop where Seedot right-of-way ends, what are you going to need from the members of this group?
I think we're going to start pulling together a list that is, what are your projects? What are the things that you want to create? And it could be something as simple as, just for visual purposes, think of a spreadsheet that has your list and you say, is it on a Seedot facility? Is it a local facility? You can split it up just as simply as that, so we have that record. And I think that it's looking at what are the connecting points? What's the criteria that we're going to use for that? Because ultimately, the plan is to help decision-making on what are you going to fund and what's the most important piece. So looking at all the different aspects of safety, connectivity, and all the bazillion of other things that go into deciding what it is you want that facility built for, that's what we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be developing all of that and sharing it with everybody. This is not going to happen overnight, obviously. This is going to take some time and energy, but we want you to be involved as much as you want to be involved, and Wendy will certainly be helping us, collecting information and whatnot.
Tim?
Yeah.
So, in the city of Colorado Springs, we go all the way down to routes that don't have a dedicated facility, but it's a low volume, low speed routes.
Yep.
And you talked about being corridor based. So, depending on your width of your corridor, we may even have several different type of facilities.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, I guess we're going to need to talk a lot about what kind of detail you're going to need, because if you want all the way down to the route level, it's pretty extensive routes that we have in the city. Or we have a lot of parallel on-street and off-street facilities too.
Sure. And I think, and this is great input, because, we're still formulating all this and how we decide to collect it and what all we need. If we're looking at corridors for the highway system, that's primarily what we're talking about. When we start talking about the plan is when we start talking about what are the projects that you want to create, and then how do they connect.
Right.
So
like the first thing that came to my mind is US 24 West.
Yeah.
So we have the Midland Trail, you have the US 24 with shoulders, part of it has shoulders, Pikes Peak is a route, and right there within half a mile we have 3 different types of facilities.
And that entire corridor can be a corridor in itself, and the user can decide which of those types of facilities they want to use, and we just put them all in the inventory.
Okay.
And ultimately, we have a statewide bicycle and byways map that is just on our state roadway system. And it identifies our roadways as with volume, truck traffic, and whether or not the shoulder is 4 feet or wider. And people use that all the time to get around the state. But we don't have anything that really says where would we really prefer them to be, and how can we promote them going to those locations. So, there's a lot of different pieces that come into play here, but ultimately we want to get better information so that we can relay it to bicyclists, make them safer, relay it to motorists so that they understand that there may be more bicyclists on a certain roadway, but that's okay because the facility can handle it. So,
Brian Shavak said to say hi.
I just
Good.
Victoria.
Hello.
When we had put together our PPACG non-motorized plan, we were told we could only look at commuting trips. Are you looking at just commuting trips, or are you looking beyond commuting trips?
No, and we've had to focus on commuting trips primarily because our funding is based on commuting transportation. But FHWA has sort of lightened that load a little bit and has opened the door to saying, well, we also have people that are using our roadways. As a motorist, we don't come up to you and say, are you using this road to get to work?
Thank you.
Or are you, just out driving?
Right.
So we're looking at all kinds of facilities because we have all kinds of users. Some are recreational, some are clearly riding bikes to get to work, to school, for errands. But again, we don't ask motorists that question. So I get a little testy about that.
I appreciate that clarification very, very much. Thank you.
Yes, Shelley.
I was wondering if you'd be looking, as part of your project, at bicycle repair stations for public use. Are you familiar with what those look like?
Yes, and we haven't been looking at that. It's not to say that I suppose we didn't include that in our inventory. We were just looking strictly at what was the facility that was being used for transport. We didn't look at we didn't look to see if there were fountains along the way or, bike shops or anything like that. We didn't include that.
Okay, so I wasn't talking necessarily about bike shops, but there is...
No, but I know what you mean. You're talking about the freestanding stands with
Right.
tools on them and stuff.
Right.
And no, we didn't include that in our inventory.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And Betsy, I think you said this, but you're looking for on- and off-street facilities, right?
Yes.
But there's kind of a limit of off-street facilities like mountain bike trail networks and things. You're not getting to that level, right?
No, we're not going to the mountain biking side of things, and because that really is way to the extent of the recreational. And when we think of recreation, we think of it more of people are using our roadways for a ride, not necessarily to get from A to B. So, and hello, by the way.
Good to see you again.
Brian was on our Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee for 2 or 4 years, or he was our mental whiz.
Don't laugh.
He did a great job for us.
Thank you. John.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, just so I'm clear, so this would be a regional development plan, and we just want to make sure that it's coordinated with the Seedot plan. So it's really to make sure I get sort of the next steps. I'll get with you, make sure that we have the right sort of coordinating information in it, but then it will be ACG staff that's going to reach out to the jurisdiction and say, hey, we're putting together this list. This is the criteria. Give us the projects you have, and then we'll have this group sort of hash through it. And then once it's done, we would forward it on to CDOT, just like we would with the other development plans.
Yep.
Okay. One other kind of I'm not sure how much of a question this is for you, because I'm not sure how fair it is, but something was said yesterday at the Joint Stack Transportation Commission meeting. Again, we will have these development lists for whenever, I think the CDOT term of art is when money falls from the sky. So we're going to have this list for when money falls from the sky. The first opportunity of clouds forming in the distance for the money to fall from is the 0.62 cent sales tax, provided it gets the signatures, provided it passes. Of that, 15% would go to the quote-unquote multimodal. Of that 15%, the first 30 million is going to go to bond debt service for the projects that are done up front. 15% is going to go to Seedot to pay for Bustang and other multimodal statewide projects. Then that 85% is going to come back to the jurisdictions for local projects, and the method that that's going to be distributed by. So far, I'm setting this up, haven't hit you with the question yet, is through the MPO and the MPOs and the TPRs. So something was said in passing yesterday that again, this might not be a fair question to you, but if you know anything more about it, they basically said that they were going to set the Transportation Commission would talk about the distribution to the TPRs, and the distribution being it's one lump sum for both transit and bike ped. And so how do you reconcile having a transit development list and a bicycle pedestrian list, but then one pot of money? Is a certain amount go to this pot, a certain amount goes to that pot? What's the hierarchy? And so the comment that said was passing would be that they will come up with something for the TPRs, but the MPOs would probably have a sub-allocation. Therefore, we would have our own PPACG board would make that decision of how much do we take off the transit list, how much do we do of our 9% of our 85% of the 15% of the tax. Believe it or not, I actually know this stuff, but it doesn't sound like it, I know. So the question is that something that is set in stone, or is that still being decided, or have you heard that before? I was kind of caught off surprised yesterday when I heard it, so I was just wondering if it's been fleshed out more, and you might have any more information.
The only thing that I have heard is that it would be up to the MPOs, the locals, to decide how they were going to spend their funds. If they wanted to put it all in transit, they could. If they wanted to put it all in bike ped, it depends on what your priorities are and what you want to do. Now, Wendy, I don't know if you've heard anything different.
Actually, I think you did a really good job of explaining what I heard yesterday as well. And I know what he knows. That's as far as I've heard.
And, you know, considering that the ballot issue, I've heard everything, just like probably everybody in this room for the last 6 months, you know, it's changing on a regular basis, and it's hard to keep up with what the latest is. But I think that, you know, from the standpoint of trying to get your best idea of what you want to do, but then it's your final decision, is how I understand it.
Right, okay.
I'm a little surprised by your statement today about it coming through TPRs and MPOs. Because they're using the HUTF formula, I thought they were just going to allocate it to us through the HUTF and the Department of Revenue. Is that not the case?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Victoria, here's my understanding, and again, this is all,
right, I
you know,
understand.
it comes at you fast and furious, sort of on the back of the napkin. So if they get the signatures, if it passes, and they move forward with it, it is 40% to the cities, towns, and counties distributed through the HUTF formula. So that is going to go through that formula.
Okay.
You're going to get a check, and you guys are going to spend that however you see fit. And because it's not encumbered by any sort of federal rules or something, if you want to spend it on a bike repair station, or you want to build a roadway with it, I think that's up to you. I don't remember reading anything where it specifies what you have to do with that. Because there was a large discussion on if locals could use that money for transit from the, what do they call the transit things? TRDs or something?
Oh, the RTD.
RTDs.
Oh.
They had a large discussion yesterday, can we give our money to an RTD? And they're like, well, if you want to, you can, right? So that's my understanding.
Okay.
Then of the remaining 60%, 45% gets distributed based on the roadway development plan. And that's, as much as you can say something is set in stone, is set in stone. So if you look at that distribution, that's based on the projects that were already on our development list. I think we have a lot of 24 work on that. I think there was a 94. But anyway, whatever that list was, and you all know what that list was because you helped develop it, they sort of identified those things. It went through Karen Rowe and her staff, and they did a great job of doing that. And that's what's going to be spent in this region of that. There's also part of the funds that get set aside for pavement. I think if you had the pavement piece and that roadway piece, this region is going to get about 18%, or excuse me, Region 2. So it's not just this region, it's this region plus a little bigger geographic area, going to get about 18% of the available funding. Then there's that last 15%. And of that last 15%, it's still under the control, for lack of a better term, of Seedot, at least initially, right? Because that's where it starts. They take the bond debt service, $30 million off the top to pay off those things that we were arguing about for the last 6 months, those ballot projects. Those ballot projects ends up being like a list of about $800 million. $400 million that's being paid for by the bond debt service, and the $400 million that is the local match that's coming from the jurisdictions. Then that leaves the remainder, 15% is going to go to the state, and I think that's why it's under state control, so they can get that 15%. So again, they can fund Bustang and other multimodal statewide projects from that. I would suspect probably Park and Rides is going to be a part of that 15%, but it wasn't said for sure, so don't take that to the bank. Then that last 85% was how they were going to distribute it. And I think from everything I'm hearing, that distribution is not going to be then fed into an HTUF. It's rather going to be fed into distribution of the TPRs and MPOs. And I think that goes back to when we were talking about this transit development list and the 9% and all those other things. So that's why I think that's tied into that, because that's that 9% you're getting, not your HUTF thing. Because if they sent it to the HUTF, you wouldn't be getting 9%. You'd be getting much more, and you'd be getting it individually. But I could be wrong. I'm just a kid.
No, I hear you.
So that's our understanding for today after yesterday's conversation.
Right. We'll see what
Still
it's like.
subject to change.
What it's like next week.
It's still subject to change.
So stay in school so you don't have to go into public service. I'm just saying.
Any other questions? Thank you, and we'll keep you posted as we move through this, and appreciate your time and help. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Okay. Item 7B, obligation of regional projects.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, if you don't mind and you will indulge me, I'll just handle this item from my chair, because that's so far away. No, I just wanted to make sure, the reason this is on the agenda is just to have a quick conversation. I think we've mentioned before, but in case anyone hasn't been at one of these meetings, the way the federal process works is you sort of have a couple of things happening. You get an apportionment of funding that basically says, these are your funds, you can go for it to use, and those apportionments aren't any surprise because they're set out in the surface transportation bill, so you can plan for it. That's the number we use to do our planning numbers. And they're good. That money is good for the year of apportionment plus 3 years. That being said, you can't spend any of that money until you have authority to do so, or what's known as obligation authority. That obligation authority is only good for 1 year. So the practical upshot of that is if the obligation authority, if they said, here's $10 million as your apportionment, and then they say your obligation authority is 90%, you really have $9 million to spend. Now, you don't have to worry about that on our end because Seedot already takes out the obligation authority before we get our number. So the number we give you is full cash. So if in the tip it says you've got $10 million, you've got $10 million. You don't have to worry about the obligation authority taking a bite into that. CDOT's already taken care of that. But what you do have to worry about is that the funding is only good for 1 year. So just think of it as the apportionment sort of your blue money, your obligation authority is your yellow money. So you need blue money and yellow money together at the same time to make green money that you can actually spend. So unless you have both of them, you're not going to get anywhere. Just in case somebody read up on this to show me up, I will say that it is possible for you to actually go back in time to spend unused apportionment, but that's only if they give you obligation authority over 100%. I've seen that once in my some career, where the obligation authority was actually over 100%. But other than that, it's usually under, it's around 95% or so. So again, if you don't use that money, it's gone. And what happens is it goes back into a federal pot, and it gets redistributed in what's known as the August redistribution. And so that's why it's very important to spend our money. The reason why I'm telling you all of this is Seedot has graciously spent the money for us before it would go away. They've spent our obligation authority in other parts of the state, and then the next year they've paid it back to us. They've held us harmless from not being able to deliver projects on an annual basis. That being said, the number has gotten up to a point where they can no longer do that, as well as the rules have changed, where now instead of it being a very generic sort of, this is your STP money, now it's here's your STP money to spend in Pikes Peak. So it is very obvious when they don't spend the money here because of the coding, that sort of thing. So the federal rules also. So the bottom line on all of this is we've had some projects, both STP and transportation alternatives, and there's some CMAQ money and some CMAQ projects that, again, for whatever reason have been delayed. They can no longer be delayed. They have to be delivered by 2020. And we've had individual conversations with everybody. The upshot of all those conversations is at this point, everyone has decided that they can move forward, maybe, and so we're just going to the board and reporting to them that, hey, this practice of rolling over funds is not going to continue. We're going to deliver the projects. Your jurisdictional staff has done a great job of understanding that and moving forward on those projects. If they come to you for support because they need match money or they need resources to deliver those projects, we would hope that you would support them, and that's it. So it's just keeping the board in the loop. So we didn't want anyone to be surprised or panicked when they see the board packet and see that this item is on the agenda. So it's one of those things where we're going to report through and move forward, but we look at this as a positive thing, because if we're all on the same page, we can deliver the projects together. On a related note, and then I'll take a breath and let people ask questions, Mr. Chair. Wendy, we're at about $2 million of identified funds, or no?
Let me tell you. So I went into the system today because I have a project for the city, I believe it is, that needs to have money moved from one phase to a right-of-way phase. So I went in to do that, and the project's not there. I run the report, it comes out on the report, but when I went into the system to fix it, it's not in the system. So there's a problem. So that might be why we have this surplus. So what I know for sure is we have about $50,000 in CMAQ, I think it is, and then we have really nothing in TAP until one of the out years, another out year. I don't think we have anything available this year. It's all been spoken for. And I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400, right now with nothing else being returned, we're at about 425. 425,000.
Metro. Right.
Metro.
So the bottom line on this is...
For which year? I'm sorry, for which year? 20...
Those are all current year.
Their current year.
Yeah, 2019.
And they would need to be obligated by 2020 or they go away. So the upshot of this is part of this exercise, right now, if no one's identified projects that they would like to cancel, we're going to have about 400,000 plus that we're going to, again, do a supplemental call for projects, or notice of funding availability might be a better way of putting it. Let everybody know that the funding is available with a couple of caveats. First, the caveat is it's got to be, a federalized, a project you want to federalize. Two, you've got to be able to obligate the funds before, I think we said June of 2020, because that way, because it takes a couple of months to work through the federal process. Is that right?
Correct.
So we'll send out an email so everyone will have an equal opportunity, equal shot at it. You'll tell us what you're looking for, and then we'll bring it back to this committee for this committee to vote on it. I do believe there is existing rules that say if you've got an existing project that needs more funding, those should get to the line first. because we want to make sure we fully fund projects, and that's actually probably pretty smart in this case, because they're obviously ready to go, and they can obligate the funds much easier than a project that's starting from scratch. And then we'll go from there. That being said, if we hear from any jurisdictions that they cancel projects between now and that, we'll add that to the total, and we'll make sure everybody knows that those funds are available, because I think somebody did mention to me that I didn't want to call you out, man, but all right.
I'm about to say it.
So yeah, in fact, do you think, is it going to get canceled?
Yes, so expect a letter or an amendment from us for, it's a little over $1 million to be returned.
So there'll be $1.5 million about, that's going to come out as that notice of funding availability. But again, don't ask for it unless you know you can use it and get it obligated. Because again, we would lose funds if they don't get obligated by the deadline. And the last thing I want to, I understand it's happened in this region before, but it's never happened on my watch anywhere I've ever been. We've never lost a penny. And I don't want that to happen here. I especially don't want to be on the front page of the paper. You know, this guy made sure we lost money. Nobody wants that to happen. So, again, make sure you're ready to go, and it's a project that we're good with. So, once we have that information, and again, if anybody else has projects that they need to cancel, like I said, there's no problem with that. We'll just do it. We'll get the money spent, and then you'll get back in the line when you're ready to go.
Mr. Chair, so is that just a letter to you saying we'd like to cancel the project, basically?
Yeah. Yeah, we just need something in writing.
How soon are you looking at your mini call for projects or the
Supplemental call?
supplemental call?
To be honest with you, I haven't sat down with a timeline.
It's quarterly. So we do this quarterly, so it'd be part of this the flexible funding. It's quarterly.
Well, when's the next quarter? Is it next month?
We're going to have to go back. I think it is next
Kevin
month.
did the last one.
Yeah.
And
So I
he's
think
been
it is
gone a
next
couple
month.
months.
And it wasn't, so it might be coming up fairly
Yeah,
soon.
I think it's next month.
So, Tim, the sooner you could get me that letter so that I can send it out something to everybody, let them know what the amount is that's available, that'd be great.
Okay.
And if anybody else is considering canceling a project, again, the sooner you let us know, the sooner the better. But again, it's totally up to you. We're not putting pressure on anyone to cancel projects. And again, if you are looking at the project and it's not, one of the problems is you don't have enough funding, well, there's an opportunity because there's going to be funding available through this supplemental call. Or if you need assistance from Seedot, Patty and Wendy have been great. So all you have to do is ask, and we'll get you the help you need to get any of the projects obligated. Because, again, it just needs to be obligated. You don't need to finish the project. You just need to get your PS&E package in for obligation.
I do want to thank you for explaining that, and that's the answer to one of life's greatest questions for me is, why is money green? You mix blue and yellow, apportioned and obligated money, and you get real green money.
Kermit the Frog taught me that one. So, actually, I've got a PowerPoint that involves ice cream, so maybe I'll bring that in if you guys want me to go through the boring thing of how it all actually works.
Sounds good.
Wendy's seen my ice cream PowerPoint.
All right. Anything else on that? All right, let's go to item 8, member entity announcements. Is there anything that anybody would like to share with us? Okay. Item 9, items for future TAC meetings. Ken? Yep.
If we can get the information together, there'll be a cost overrun if we've got the balances from canceled projects. So be thinking of your cost overrun projects and be prepared. I'll check, but you're right. We're due very quickly for the next quarterly cost overrun thing. The other is we discussed and decided that we would use the Seedot performance measures targets for congestion, CMAC, freight, and all those remaining ones that we have to detect. So I'll be bringing forward draft language and wording for adopting CDOT targets next month. Get it to the board in September. We have to have it approved by November to meet the federal deadline.
Okay. Wendy?
And now that we know which projects are moving forward and which ones may or may not be canceled, we probably need to do our administrative amendment for the roll forward so that they're officially in your tip, because that's not the case right now.
Yes, let's do that.
All of the roll forwards were just amended into the tip last week.
Oh, you did do it?
Under
Okay.
legal amendment.
Okay.
Part of the amendment.
All right, okay.
Thank you for doing that, Ken, appreciate it.
Great. John?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, if it is in fact a light agenda, would like to be cognizant of your time, but if it's a light agenda, we'll probably have an item that talks about a new tip. What would you like to see in a new tip document? What would you like to see as far as features for an online tip? Because hopefully, we'll finish the interview process, and Tim and Wendy, thanks for sitting on the interview panel to hire somebody new. We'll have someone on board. We have the money in the work program amendment, and thanks, Lily, for helping us with that. So we'll have the money, we have the people, then there's no more excuses. I can't say I've only been here for, a week anymore. I've been here long enough. It's time to start fixing these things. So if it's a light agenda, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'd like to have an item on there that just sort of talks about you as the end user. What would you like to see that would make your life easier and make it easier to understand and easier to use? Feel free to look at, type in Transportation Improvement Program, MPO, and see what sort of documents come up that you like. So if you've got a couple, say, hey, you should really take a look at what they have in Dallas or San Antonio or whatever, give us those and that. But it was just that sort of discussion, if we've got time, to give us some more input to make sure that we're delivering a product that makes sense for you guys.
Sounds good. As long as it doesn't cut out PowerPoint on ice cream, we want to save time for that. So
If you want that, if you want that presentation, we will put that on the agenda. I'm ready to roll with that.
Sounds good. All right, and are we starting to develop that bicycle program list next month, or it's just something that's going to be, we'll be addressing in the future?
We'll be addressing it in the future.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
next month is probably a little
Too soon.
early yet.
Yeah.
But we're thinking about it, and if you have any comments, what you would like, if there's any criteria that you want to consider, feel free to send that to me now. I collect all ideas and information all the time.
Okay.
So,
Sounds good.
It's going to be well with me.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Unless anybody else has anything else, let's call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good week. Good month.